Greetings, this is an unknown recap and I will tell you what happened in a 2003 movie called Dead End, where a family gets into a little trouble on their way through the woods. Enjoy the movie, and who's hungry, have a good meal.
Give it to me.
The Harrington family, Frank, Laura, Richard and Marion, and the latter's buddy, Brad Miller, travel to Boston on Christmas Eve to visit Laura's mother to celebrate the holiday at her house. As night fell, sleep began to overtake the weary men. Frank, who was sitting behind the wheel, also succumbed to drowsiness, so that as he pulled onto the forest road, he nearly collided with an oncoming car, but managed to dodge the collision. Meanwhile, the car he almost hit fled the scene, and Mom's cake was already ruined. Insert.
It's pumpkin and chocolate.
Smells like ass.
It turned out that Frank had decided to take a shortcut by taking the forest road so that the highway they had been driving to Boston for 29 years would no longer bore him. The Harringtons continued on their way and began to sing to stay awake, but Frank noticed a woman in white on the side of the road. Insert hallucination. She appeared at the driver's door and didn't say a word, so Frank assumed she was in shock after the accident and asked his daughter to get out of the car to let the lady down. So daughter Marion decided to meet a few moments of loneliness in the woods with a cigarette. The family stops at the woodsman's house. Richard immediately retreats into the wilderness to entertain himself, and as Frank and Laura deal with the connection in the house, Brad tries to get the unknown lady with the baby in her arms to talk, telling her how he wants to propose to Mariona, though she is at the same time practicing how to tell her boyfriend about the breakup. The woman finally answers. She says it's her daughter, and her name is Emmy, and she's totally chill. Brad wonders how she's breathing, completely covered by plaid, but the woman replies with a smile that she doesn't have to worry about that, because her daughter is dead. Brad, disbelieving, opens the plaid and sees a bloody mess instead of the baby's face. The family runs to the car screaming, but the boy and the girl are gone. Marion sees a black Cadillac passing by with Brad in the back window, so she runs to her family and they all go in pursuit. But it's too late. On the way, Frank notices Brad's body on the side of the road, or rather what's left of it, because according to the characters he has been worked on with an axe or a chainsaw. Marion faints and Richard pulls a phone out of his pocket that Brad's ear is hooked on. Laura calls 911, but on the other side a woman begs for help. She can't feel her legs and her baby is already cold, screaming for them to finally wake up. The father asks his son to pull the body away.
What do I look like, your fucking janitor?
Insert garbage, and here's Laura trying to bring her daughter to her senses. When they go to the police station, Frank notices a sign with a town the family can't find on the map. When the family discovers that their clocks have all turned to 7:30 p.m., Richard makes the assumption that it is aliens, as immediately a baby stroller appears in front of the family. Richard goes to check it out and pokes fun at the family that something is eating him, but it turns out to be empty, so Frank pushes it to the curb and decides to forget that he's driving. While Richard tries to bring his sister to her senses, but it fails.
Disappeared. I told you you'd been abducted by aliens. We stuck it in the microwave and we fried it.
Back on the road, Frank wanted to listen to music, but there was the sound of a baby crying. The spouses quarrel, remembering how they spent last Christmas, when suddenly they have a flat tire and Marion suddenly tells them that she is pregnant and Richard that he smokes weed.
Change the tire.
The Harringtons are forced to make another stop. While Frank is changing the tire, Richard goes into the woods for a smoke and runs into a woman in white. The stranger kisses him, biting off his lower lip, then removes his dress, and the boy recoils in horror from her. Soon, the same black Cadillac that took Brad drives past the Harringtons' car, but this time it takes Richard away. Frank, Laura, and Marion follow the kidnapper, but only find Richard's mutilated and badly burned body on the road. Seeing her dead son, Laura begins to slowly lose her mind and declares that Richard is not Frank's son, but a certain Alan Rickson, who, as it turns out later, is Frank's old pal. After removing all the presents from the trunk except for a shotgun for Laura's brother, which Frank and Marion decide to keep for self-defense, they load Richard's body in it, after which the thinned-out family drives down the road again. Laura begins to overeat and has to stop again as she vomits from overeating. While Frank and Marion discuss what to do about Laura's insanity, she pulls out a shotgun, mistaking it for a toy gun, and shoots Frank in the right thigh. Her daughter helps her father remove the shotgun blast from the wound, and on the road again, they discuss that Marcotte is a military base, which is why it's not on the map. Marion falls asleep and remembers how her father dodged the car where the Marcotte sign was, and when she wakes up she thinks her father is missing, but he only calculated how far they were going and came to the conclusion that Marcotte is off the coast, so they have about 50 miles to go, which is no more than an hour. After a nap, Laura reports seeing people in the woods while Marion and Frank hear distant voices. Laura notices her old friend and jumps out of the car. Frank immediately stops and they spot a damn black caddy. Frank decides to pelt it with buckshot, but it immediately stops and drives back away, and out of the darkness appears Laura, only with a small hole in her head through which her brain is leaking. Eventually she falls down and dies. Frank desperately tries to shoot himself, but Marion dissuades him from that step, reminding him of her child and the fact that he is the only one she has left. They drive on, and the thought occurs to Frank to make their way through the woods on foot. Leaving the car behind, they make their way through the thicket and find a barbed wire fence and, a little further away, a light in the distance. Its source is the headlights of their own abandoned car. It is locked from the inside, and Frank gets goosebumps at the thought that the headlights were turned on by the dead Laura. To calm himself down, he makes a list on a piece of paper of what I'll do when this is over. But evil fate gives the tormented men no rest. They arrive at the same abandoned cabin, not far from where they found the woman in white. Frank examines the house, sending Marion away for a lantern, and he sees a stranger. Marion tries to calm him down, but Frank hits her in hysterics and the girl falls senseless. Having come to his senses, Frank lays his daughter down in the car and, armed with a shotgun, goes into the woods after the shadow of the stranger in white and disappears. Marion comes to herself in the car and calls for her father, but the stranger's voice proclaims that he is dead. Creepy shadows appear around the car, and a frightened Marion gets behind the wheel and drives off. But before she has even driven a mile, the engine cuts out because she has run out of fuel. Marion continues on foot, but the sight of her father's bloody body hanging from a tree finally robs her of her will to live. As she wanders down the road, she finds 4 bodies in black bags: Frank, Laura, Richard, and Brad. A black Cadillac shows up and a woman in white who says he doesn't want Marion. She gets in the car and drives off. The next second a bright light hits the girl in the back. She turns around and sees her family's car. Then the collision scene from the beginning of the film repeats, but with Marion instead of the other car. Suddenly, Marion wakes up in the hospital, where the doctor reassures her that she and the baby will be all right. It turns out that Frank fell asleep while turning onto a forest road and crashed into an oncoming car with a young woman and child in it. All but Marion died. The man who discovered them and reported the accident asked the hospital doctor who was caring for her, Helen Marcotte, about Marion's condition and offered her a ride in his car, a black Cadillac. Next, we are shown the scene of 2 workers removing small pieces of car wreckage from the road, and one of them finds Frank's burnt note, "What I'll do when this is over," which has 2 points. Buy Atari and become the coolest grandfather ever. He shows it to his partner, but he throws it away. And after the credits, they show a picture of the Harrington family from last year's Christmas. Friends, if you liked the video, support the channel, subscribe and like it, because not for nothing YouTube has invented them to support the authors. Thank you very much for watching. See you in the next video.